Hello. And let's read! I'm so excited to read tonight, even though it's in this room under the yellow halogen glow of my bulbs. But tonight, yesterday I decided that tonight I'm going to read something that I've been wanting to read for a very long time. And by a very long time, I actually mean probably around 3 to 4 years I've wanted to read this out loud. What I've been intending to do is record it so that I can, just record it as audio so that it would be like an audio book so that people could listen to it. Maybe I'd put the audio file out there. But I've never gotten around to it, even though I have a good microphone for my iPad and a good voice editing. Oh, hey Maylee. This is a story about cats. So I'm just going to, since I have an audience who needs to hear a story about cats in order to cheer up, I'm going to cut to the chase. I'm not going to tell you a whole bunch about the history. Just that it is from this book, Unexpected Magic, which is a compilation of a lot of Diana Wynne Jones stories, and it is this thick. It's very thick. And let's see. There are a lot of good short stories in here. Nad and Dan Adenquafi, that's one of my favorites. Plague of Peacocks is hilarious. The Girl Who Loved the Sun, I love that one too. But my very favorite is Little Dot. So, page 314. 314. Alright, everyone else and Miley, this is Diana Wynne Jones's Little Dot. I am lucky enough to own a wizard who talks to me. Henry knows that we cats do not like being taken by surprise. This is how I know all about my early life, when I was much too young to remember. Henry lives in an old farm in the hills above Etmore, and he works 3 days a week for the Science Institute down in the valley, it is very secret work, he says, because the government does not want it generally known that they do magical research, but they pay him quite well. Henry is an excellent wizard, but he is far too kind-hearted for his own good. At the time Henry came into my possession, a young lady, who even Henry admits was taking advantage of him horribly, had just moved out of the farm, taking with her all 4 of her brothers, her mother, and Henry's prize pigs. The only person left was Henry's great-aunt Harriet, who lives by herself in the cottage in the yard. Henry was lonely. He tried keeping hens for company. He still has these, but all they give him is eggs. Hens, if you are an innocent town cat, have sharp claws, like we do, and a very sharp bit on the front of their heads. A cat has to be careful around them. Henry tried to console himself for the sudden quiet emptiness in the farm by buying a CD player and 20 operas, but he was still lonely. He went for long walks. He tells me that the hills are excellent for walking in, and this may be true, but I have never tried it. It always seems to rain when Henry goes walking. That particular day, it was raining relentlessly, the kind of rain that is mixed up with the mist and gets into all your crannies. Henry says he enjoyed it. He tramped along with his beard dripping on his chest, listening to the pattering of drops in the bracken and the gurgling of all the mountain streams, until he came to the place where the path goes over a rocky shoulder, and a storm drain goes under the path. Henry says he could hear the drain rushing from a long way off. He thought this was the reason he couldn't properly hear what the black lady was saying. The water was thundering under the path when he got near. He wondered what an old West Indian woman was doing so far up in the hills, particularly as she seemed quite dry, but she loomed out of the mist so suddenly, and she was beckoning to him so urgently that he didn't have time to wonder much. He thought she said, "Hurry up, man," and pointed downward to where the storm drain came off the hill, but he was not sure. But he galloped to where she was pointing, where he was just in time to see a tiny, sodden slip of fur go sluicing down the drain and vanish under the road. He rushed to the other side of the path and went crashing down the bank, expecting me to come swirling out the drain any second. In fact, I had caught on a stone, about a foot inside the drain. I was buried in yellow, frothy bubbles and practically camouflaged. Henry says he never would have found me if I hadn't had 4 white feet and 1 white ear. He plunged to his knees in the water and groped up the pipe until he had hold of me. He says I was frozen. Then he stood up, raining water from knees, elbows, and beard, and shouted up at the black lady, "Here's the kitten you dropped, madam!" There was no sign of the lady. Henry floundered back to the path with great difficulty, because he had me cupped in both hands and didn't want to hurt me, and I stared into the mist both ways, along the path and then up and down the hills, but there was no West Indian woman anywhere. He couldn't understand it, but he said he couldn't let that bother him for long, because it was obviously urgent to get me somewhere warm and dry. He ran all the way back to the farm with me. There he put me on a towel in front of the kitchen fire and knelt beside me with a saucer of milk. I was old enough to lap, he says, and I had drunk about half the saucerful when Great Aunt Harriet came in to borrow some sugar. Great Aunt Harriet always opens Henry's kitchen door by crashing at it with her stick. Henry says this was when I first showed my chief talent. I vanished. Henry was most upset. He crawled about looking under chairs and the hearthrug, and couldn't think where I'd got to. Great Aunt Harriet said, "What are you doing, Henry?" "Looking for the kitten," Henry said, or rather shouted. Great Aunt Harriet is not good at human voices, unless they are very loud. Henry went on to shout how he had found me, "And I can't think," he bellowed, "how someone can drop a kitten in a drain and then just go away." "Because she wasn't human, probably, and there's no need to shout," Great Aunt Harriet replied. "Have you looked in the coal scuttle?" Henry looked, and there I was, crouched up and trembling and black all over from the coal. Great Aunt Harriet sank into a chair and watched while Henry wiped all the black off me and onto the towel. "What a rag-bag-marked little thing," she said. "You'll call her Dot, I suppose." I know what Great Aunt Harriet meant. I am all over dots. Somewhere on me I have a dot of every color a cat can have. I have looked in mirrors, and Henry has checked. I have silver and gray and tabby, and 2 kinds of ginger, and almost pink, and tortoiseshell, Burmese brown, cream, as well as white and black, and I have 1 blue eye in a black patch, and 1 green inside ginger. I am special. But at that time, Henry said, "Dot is a trivial sort of name, Auntie. A cat should always have a special, impressive name. I shall have to think." Please yourself," said Great Aunt Harriet, and began to complain that the hens kept her awake, roosting in the coach house on the other side of her bedroom wall. Henry hates people complaining. He put one of his operas on to drown Great Aunt Harriet out. This part I dimly remember. There was a lot of singing that I slept through quite happily on Henry's knee, and then suddenly there was this huge woman's voice screaming, "Len igmi son of Trey la mortauna." I vanished like a shot. It took Henry and Great Aunt Harriet half an hour to find me. I was behind the big blue and white meat dish halfway up the Welsh dresser. We still don't know how I got there. "That settles it," Henry said. "Her name is Turandot, out of this opera." He set me on his left leg and stroked me with 1 finger while he explained that the screaming woman was a princess called Turandot, singing a song to warn her prince that he would die if he didn't answer her 3 riddles. "The words mean, there are 3 riddles, but only 1 death," he said. "So, my name is Turandot. And I am a princess, but somehow I am nearly always called Little Dot. Some of my chief memories of growing up, apart from chasing wisps of straw and galloping over the shed roofs and tearing up Henry's work papers and playing with the stuffed mouse Henry bought me, are of sitting on Henry's knee while he explained how I got my name. He played that screaming woman a lot, and I always vanished. Henry would fish me out from behind the meat dish, and later from under the Welsh dresser, and then from inside its cupboard, and sit me on his left knee, and then on both knees when I grew big enough, and explained how I got my name. At night I slept in his beard, until after about 6 months he complained that I was throttling him, and asked me to sleep on his head instead. A few weeks after I started sleeping on Henry's head, Henry came home with 2 more cats, 1 under each arm. They were a dark tabby and a ripple ginger, and they were both bigger than me. I was horrified. I was truly hurt. I went bounding up the coach house roof, where I drove the cockerel down, and sat in his place with my back to everything, staring down at the moor. Henry came and called to me, but I was too angry and offended to listen. I sat there for hours. In the end, Henry climbed on the roof too and sat panting astride it. "Little Dot," he said, "it's not my fault. I was in town and I met the black lady again. She was in the garden of an empty house and she called me over. Someone had moved house and left the 2 cats behind. They were both starving. I had to help them, Little Dot. Do forgive me." It soothed me just a little that he had come up onto the roof to explain, but I couldn't let him see that. I kept my back to him and twitched my tail. "Please, Little Dot," Henry said. "You'll always be my first and only cat." "Prove it," I said. "Send them away again." "I can't do that," he said. "They've nowhere to live, and you can count their ribs, Little Dot. Let me look after them, and I'll do anything you want." "All right," I said, and turned around and nosed his hand, but I didn't purr. Henry said, "Thank God," and more or less fell off the roof. The noise brought Great Aunt Harriet out of her cottage. "I thought you were that dratted rooster again," she said. "What a fuss about one little spotted cat. When are you going to build a proper hen house?" "Soon, soon," Henry said, rolling in the weeds. He called those cats Orlando and Cleopatra, would you believe? But they generally answered to Orange and Claus. Claus was a tomcat anyway, and Claus suited him better. I made it very clear to them right from the start that it was me who slept on Henry's head, and I made it equally clear to Henry that I was having my food up on the Welsh dresser in future, not down on the flagstones like an ordinary cat. I wanted him to put 2 more cat flaps in the kitchen door too, so that they wouldn't sully mine, but he said that one would have to do. He was too busy planning the hen coop Great Aunt Harriet kept asking for to cut holes in doors. Orange and Claus and I got on quite well, actually. They knew I was the one who really owned Henry, and they had always lived in a town up to then, so they were quite fascinated when I showed them the farm and the hills, and warned them to be careful of hens and Great Aunt Harriet's stick. Great Aunt Harriet always said she had no patience with cats and was liable to prove it by swatting you. Orange went out exploring a lot, while Claus taught me how to catch mice in the sheds. I mean, I knew mice before Claus came, but I hadn't known you could eat them. But Henry just couldn't seem to stop himself adopting cats. "I seem to have got into the habit," he said to me apologetically the day he arrived home from the Scientific Institute with Millamant in a basket. "Don't mind her. She's a victim of a mad scientist at the Institute. I sneaked her out of a cage there, and I'm afraid she's a bit mad herself by now." Millamant was a skinny Burmese with a squint, and mad was an understatement. I mean, she liked being wet. The first time Claus and I found Mill swimming in the water butt, we naturally assumed she was drowning and set up a scream for help. This brought Great Aunt Harriet out of her cottage, who assumed the same thing and tried to pull Millamant out. Millamant scratched her, deeply. In reply, Great Aunt Harriet pushed Millamant right under the water and stumped off, shouting to Henry that she couldn't abide cats and this one was crazy. Later, she found Mill in the bath with her and threw her out of the window, yelling to Henry that he was to stop owning cats at once before everyone else went mad too. Mill didn't care. She had a wash in the water butt and then got in the shower with Henry. Great Aunt Harriet didn't really dislike cats. She just needed the right cat to belong to. This became clear when one of her nephews arrived for a visit. He had brought his cat, Mr. Williams, in a sort of glass box pitched sideways into the back of his sports car. Mr. Williams was black and well-mannered and scared of almost everything. Well, so would I be scared of everything if I was forced to ride around sideways in a glass box. As soon as Henry saw Mr. Williams, he strode to the car and opened the box. "That's no way to treat a cat," Henry said. "Turn your car around and drive away now." "But I've come to stay with Aunt Harriet," the nephew protested. "For a week." "Oh, no, you haven't," Great Aunt Harriet screamed from inside her cottage. "Go away at once." Henry looked very surprised at this. Great Aunt Harriet was supposed to be very fond of this nephew. She was leaving him her things in her will. But as soon as Henry opened the glass box, Mr. Williams had done a vanishing act almost as good as mine, and ended up clamped to Great Aunt Harriet's chest. Shortly, Great Aunt Harriet arrived in the doorway of her cottage with a trembling black cat in her arms. He had his claws into her everywhere, and everywhere he could hang on to. Every claw said, "This human is mine!" Great Aunt Harriet accepted this at once, the way humans do, and she told the nephew he was not to set foot in her cottage ever again. The nephew drove sulkily away, and Mr. Williams stayed. He was as unbalanced as Mill in his way. He liked it when Great Aunt Harriet called him her "coochie-woochie darling diddums" and tickled his tummy. But we forgave him for that, considering what he had been through. Great Aunt Harriet made Henry drive her into town to alter her will so that she could leave her things to Henry instead. Henry told me that the things were all hideous china ornaments, and he hoped she would change her mind. Then he drove off to visit one of the farmers on the moor who had asked to see him urgently, and came back with a sixth cat. The sixth cat was called Madame Dalrymple, and she was white and fluffy as a dandelion clock. Or she was when Henry had washed the muck off her. Nobody knew where she had come from, or who she had belonged to, or who had belonged to her, and Madame Dalrymple was far too stupid to explain. She certainly did not belong to the farm where Henry found her. He had discovered her struggling in the farmer's pig pen, in considerable danger from the sow who lived in the pen. Henry had to bathe her 4 times. Unlike Millamant, Madame Dalrymple hated water and actually scratched Henry, but this was practically the only touch of spirit she ever showed. She was stupid. She lay about in picturesque poses, and sighed to anyone who would listen that what she really, really needed was a blue satin bow around her neck. I mostly ignored her, except for when she tried to sit on Henry's knee. I always made her sit on his feet instead. Henry's knees are mine. Both of them. A couple weeks after Madame Dalrymple arrived, all the farmers on the moor came to see Henry, looking grave and anxious. We went up on the roofs and stared at their Land Rovers and jeeps and vans. Several of them had dogs in them, so we had to stay on the roofs until they had gone. Then I went down and sat on Henry's papers so that he could explain to me what it was all about. I am the only one who was allowed to sit on Henry's desk or climb on his computer. Henry was looking as upset as the farmers. It seemed that there was a great beast loose on Etmore, probably from a zoo somewhere, Henry said, although nobody really knew where it had come from or even what kind of animal it was. It had only been seen for brief moments at dusk from a long way off, but it had eaten a lot of sheep and attacked a number of other animals too. Henry spread out the various photographs the farmers had brought, and I sat soberly with my tail around my legs and looked at them. I felt the hair on my spine and my tail trying to bush out. At one photo I had to struggle not to do a strong vanishment and end up cowering in the back of the airing cupboard or somewhere. This one had caught the beast slinking into a distant hedge. It was dark and shaped very like a cat, but not at all like a cat either. It was wrong. It was, well, a monster. And it was obviously huge. If I had had any doubt about its size, there was the picture of a horse it had attacked. The poor creature had lost half its hide down one side and 8 long bleeding streaks. That beast had claws. And then there were the pictures of the poor mutilated remains of a dog and several cats the thing had played with. My back shuddered, and I thought uneasily of myself and Claus playing with the mice in the sheds. This beast played just the same way. Yes, Henry said, this is a real creature, and a real menace too, Little Dot. The farmers want me to help them track it down and shoot it. They've tried to catch it several times, but it always seems to slip away when they think they've got it cornered. They want me to apply some science to the hunt. He sighed. They say science, Little Dot, but I can see this is going to take magic. Normally I'd hate the idea. It seems so unfair. But just look at those cats. It's got to be stopped. And until we've caught it, you cats are going to stay indoors at nights. Make that clear to the others, will you? He sighed again. Hens inside too, I suppose. I explained about the beast to the others, but I am not sure they believed me. Only Madame Dalrymple was prepared to stay inside in comfort. Early evening became a frenzy of hens running and cackling, with Henry galloping around the yard driving them into the coach-house, and then getting more and more exasperated as he grabbed Orange as Orange tried to slither out into the landscape and seized Millamant, dripping from the water butt. Then Claus had to be tempted out of the sheds with a slice of mackerel, and Mr. Williams wheedled with a chunk of melon. For some reason, this was Mr. Williams's favorite food. And the rest of us thrust indoors with urgent entreaties. "Get in or I'll kick you, cat! I'm out of patience! And no, the cat flap is now locked! Understand? Even for you, little Dot!" This last, regardless of the fact that I was only watching. It took nearly an hour before the 5 of us were moodily gathered on Henry's bed, or under it, if it was Millamant, and Mr. Williams finally thrust into Great Aunt Harriet's cottage. Actually, Mr. Williams came straight out again through the bathroom window as soon as Henry was indoors. He gets claustrophobia, you see. During this time, when he was not at the Scientific Institute, or conferring with farmers, Henry built the mobile hen coop. Mr. Williams and I both found it fascinating. It was a long wooden triangle with 2 sloping sides and flat ends and bottom. In one sloping side there were 3 sliding doors for the hens to go in through, and boxes full of straw inside for the hens to roost in. Once the hens were inside it for the night, Henry said, the sliding doors would be shut to keep them all safe. But here's the clever part, Henry said. If it stays in one place, it kills all the grass. "Weeds," said Mr. Williams. "They're weeds in this yard." "Weeds, then," Henry agreed. "But I don't want to kill them, whatever they are." "Finest clumps of nettles in this county," Mr. Williams observed. "Thistles and chamomile, too." "Medicinal and magic uses for all 3, Henry said. "Do stop mewing at me, Mr. Williams. It puts me off. Anyway, this coop is designed to rise in the air and move to another place by magic. Watch." Mr. Williams had to go away when Henry demonstrated magic. He said it made the roots of his fur sore, but I stayed and watched. I found I understood that magic. But then I told you I was special. Unfortunately, the hens shared Mr. Williams's feelings about magic. None of them would go near that coop. They ended up being chased into the coach house every night, and disturbing Great Aunt Harriet as usual. I used the coop as a plaything after that. If I spread myself along the pointed top, I found I could activate the magics and send the coop floating in any direction I wanted. To my surprise, Madame Dalrymple was the only other cat who thought this was fun. As soon as she saw me on the coop, she hopped up behind me, and, not in the least worried that the magics bushed her coat out until she looked like a fluffy snowball, she went for sedate rides round and round the farmyard. Henry stood in the kitchen door and laughed helplessly at us whenever he took a break from making magics to catch the beast of Etmore. He had designed several rings of big black magic generators, and these were placed out in the moor to surround the areas where the beast had been active. Every day his farmer friends moved the generators a few feet in a carefully planned direction so that eventually the beast would be trapped inside a small tight circle. Then they would go in with their guns. Henry had a map laid out on the dining room table with tiny little models of the generators on it. "Do they know you're using magic?" I asked, sitting on the edge of the table to look at it. "No, I call them field static generators," Henry said. They wouldn't believe they were paying for something that worked if I said it was magic. I've had to ask them to pay for the cost of the materials, you see. I made these things down at the Institute. The little model generators looked so enticing that I couldn't resist putting out a paw to the nearest. It wobbled beautifully. To my utter indignation, Henry promptly pushed me off the table. I sat at his feet and did my outraged stare at him. "No," he said. "No touching, not even for you, Princess. This map is part of the magic. I think the dining room door is going to be shut from now on." "Don't you trust me?" I said. "Not where little wobbly things are concerned. No," Henry said. "Run away now. There's a good cat." I stalked out into the yard, so furious that my tail lashed at thistles and clumps of other weeds all the way to the coop. Henry didn't trust me? I couldn't believe it. I jumped up on the coop and took it around in a great angry circle until it was pointing at the gates. The gates were always open in Henry's farm. I was almost through into the road when Madame Dalrymple bounded elegantly among the weeds and jumped up behind me. "Where are we going?" she asked, settling herself tastefully. "Away," I said. I didn't want her. I was angry, but I had to go somewhere now. I was out in the road. So I turned right. uphill, the way that led to the hill paths. The coop didn't like the climbing. It slewed and it slogged and it crawled. In the end, I wrestled it around onto the nearest level path, which happened to be the path that Henry had taken nearly a year ago when he found me. The coop went much better there. We were fine until a light, foggy rain began to fall. Madame Dalrymple shifted and twitched. "Where are we really going?" she said. "Is it far?" She looked very odd, with every hair on end and a raindrop on each hair. She made a silvery ball, rather like the ornaments Great-Aunt Harriet had hung on a tree at Christmas time. "I'm going to look at the storm drain where Henry found me," I said. I thought I might as well. "Your birthplace," Madame Dalrymple said placidly. "How correct. He's told you all about it so often, of course." Even I can begin to understand him when he talks about it now, but I wish I could understand human talk like you do. I'd ask for a blue satin ribbon. Do you think he'd get me one?" "No," I said. I was having problems. A peculiarity of the magic on the coop, which had not shown up when we were just jogging around the yard, was that if you went in a straight line, you went faster and faster. It seemed to double its speed continuously. Rain was hitting my eyes like needles and whipping off my whiskers. Rocks and blurred grass raced past underneath. "This is fun," said Madame Dalrymple, vast with magic. I didn't think so. I could see and hear the storm drain thundering under the path already. We went whizzing up to it, and after that the path turned a sharp corner. I knew we were going to whiz straight out over the hillside. I couldn't possibly stop us in time. "Get ready to jump off," I gasped at Madame Dalrymple. "Why?" she asked. "Because," I began, and then we were at the storm drain. "Steady, steady," said a big black lady in the middle of the path. The pale palms of her hands slapped against the triangular front of the coop, and it came to the ground with a crunch. "Where you going so fast?" she said to me. I thought I'd look at my birthplace," I explained. "You weren't born there, honey. It was up the hill a piece," she said. "There you got swept away." "Good heavens!" Madame Dalrymple said, leaning over to look at the rushing water. "You might have been drowned." "That is so, but never you mind that now," the woman said. "There are 3 things I'm telling you. I want you to learn and remember. Say them after me, honey, not to forget. The first one is, the higher, the fewer. You got that?" "The higher, the fewer," I repeated, gazing up at her. Her face was black and wet as my nose. I'd never seen a human like her before. "And you," the woman said to Madame Dalrymple, but Madame Dalrymple just stared. She has no memory at all. The woman shrugged and turned back to me. "Now, chocolate herrings are impure. That's 2. She said. "Chocolate herrings are impure," I said, still gazing. She smelled the same way the magics of the coop did, but stronger and spicier. I began to wonder if she was quite a human. "That's good, that's great," she told me. "Now the last is the Beast of Etmore." "The Beast of Etmore," I said obediently. The woman had a turban on her head that stuck up in 2 black peaks at either side of her head. They reminded me of my own ears. "If you don't mind my asking," I said, "who are you?" "My name is Bastet, little Dot," she said, "and my calling is cats. Have you got my 3 sayings in your head? You about to need them badly." "Yes," I said. "Good," Bastet said. "Then walk around to the other end of this thing you're riding and go home. I send a friend to you any second now. Make 7. That's a good number." I jumped down and picked my way over the mud and the stones of the path to the opposite end of the coop. By the time I got there, Bastet had gone. I was not surprised. I think she was very magical indeed. I jumped, rather sadly, up onto the coop, facing the way we had come, and I was just about to get it going again when another whiff of that spiced magic smell struck my nose. I looked up the hillside and saw something mostly white struggling down through the heather. A pleading mew came from it. "It's all right," I called out. "I'm waiting for you." A large cat, almost twice my size, came scrambling and sliding down the wet rocks to the path. She was so wet and draggled and humbled that I never thought of being afraid of her. "Oh, dear," she said, "I'm so sorry to bother you, but could you find me somewhere to shelter? I've nowhere." "You can come home with us," I said. "I'll speak to Henry. Hop up." The large cat looked up at me and at Madame Dalrymple, staring vaguely down at her. Then she looked at the coop. "Is there a way to ride inside?" she asked diffidently. The large cat looked up at me. Oh, no, skip that. Whoops. "Is there a way to ride inside?" "Well, we've got 3 doors," I said, "but I don't know how to open them." "Like this, I think," the large cat said, and somehow she managed to push the middle hatch aside and crawl inside the coop. "Lots of lovely straw," she said. "Thank you." "You're welcome," I said. There was something about this big, wet, polite cat that made me like her. "She's got the same markings as you have. All those dots," Madame Dalrymple said, craning down to look through the hatch. I craned down to look inside, too. Inside the hatch I could see splotches of gray, tabby, ginger, and pink, blots of black, and dots of sandy brown and cream. But to my relief, because this cat was so much larger, she seemed more white than anything. I like to think I am unique. "The effect is quite different," I said haughtily. "Not a lot," said Madame Dalrymple. "We'll have to call her Big Dot." I made a silently offended no comment, and moved the coop off. It was quite as difficult going back. The farther we went, the faster the coop moved. By the time we reached the farm road, we were scorching along as fast as a car. I worked frantically to slow us down, and of course Madame Dalrymple, in her usual maddening way, chose the moment that I was trying to aim us at the farm gate to say, "Why did that woman tell you to remember nonsense?" "I don't know," I spat as we hurtled into the yard. Mr. Williams, who was sitting in our way, rose 6 feet in the air and managed to miss us. Orange and claws squirted out of nettle clumps to either side. We raced on until we hit the water butt and stopped. Millamant came head and shoulders out of it, squinting reproachfully. "Where's Henry?" I asked her. "In the living room, but you won't want to go in there," Mill replied. "Of course I will. It's got the best chairs," I said. As I bounded away toward the cat flap, Mill said, "I did warn you!" But I took no notice. I raced through the kitchen and past the dining room, where the door was now closed on that map, and galloped into the living room. There I stopped as if I'd run into the water butt again. Henry was standing there, holding both the hands of a human woman. He had a beaming, dazzled look, and he was staring into the human's face with the same expression that he usually saves for me. I suppose she was a handsome human in a thin, dark way, but still, I mewed, loudly. Henry jumped. "Oh, look, Farah," he said. "Here's Turandot now." To my extreme surprise, he swooped on me and picked me up. I've never known him to do that without my permission before. I squirmed around and gave him my outraged stare. But he took no notice and held me out toward this woman. "There," he said. "Isn't she beautiful?" The woman narrowed her eyes at me. She shuddered. "Henry, she's hideous. She looks as if she's got the plague with all those blotches." She backed away. "Don't bring her near me. I'm not a cat person." Henry said cheerfully, "Okay," and dropped me. Dropped me! Just like that! I went away, back through the cat flap and over to the coop, where Big Dot was peering nervously out of the hatch. "I'll have to introduce you to Henry later, I'm afraid," I said. "Are you hungry?" "Terribly," she said. "You met that Farah creature, then?" Millamant said, popping out of the water butt again. "I tried to tell you. I think she's staying here." "Not if I have anything to say about it," I said, leading Big Dot into the kitchen. When we got there, Great Aunt Harriet was sitting in the best chair with Mr. Williams on her lap. "Oh, we've got a Big Dot now, I see," she said, watching Big Dot fit herself humbly through the cat flap. "Better than the other thing that arrived here today. I must say, Henry has a genius for choosing terrible women. Little Dot, try to make him see reason. I've never disliked anyone so much in my life as I disliked that Farah." I jumped up on the Welsh dresser and observed that half my breakfast was still there. Big Dot, if you'd like to come up here," I began, but Great Aunt Harriet popped Mr. Williams on the floor and sprang up, saying, "Now, Turandot, don't make the poor thing struggle up there, for goodness sake, not in her condition," and bustled about finding saucers. She gave Big Dot most of a tin of meaty chunks, a pyramid of dry food, and a soup bowl of milk. Big Dot ate it all. She was starving. "Is this Farah woman really staying?" I asked. Great Aunt Harriet never listens to me, but Mr. Williams said gloomily, "We fear the worst. He's lent her his pajamas." Mr. Williams was right. but it was worse than we realized. We expected that Farah would be given one of the spare rooms, but when we followed Henry upstairs to bed, we discovered that he and Farah were sharing Henry's room. Farah turned and stared at us. "Why are they here?" "Little Dot always sleeps on my head," Henry explained. "Orange and Claus and Madame Dalrymple usually dispose themselves around on the duvet, and Millamant curls up in the chamber pot, you know." "Well, they're not doing that any more," Farah said. "Get rid of them." Henry said in that cheerful, obliging way, "Okay." And to our extreme distress, we found ourselves pushed outside by Henry's magic, out and down the stairs, and then out again until we were in the farmyard. It was as if he had forgotten we were in danger from the beast there. It was a cold night, too. Claus and Orange huddled together for warmth, and Madame Dalrymple sat as close to Mill as Mill would let her. I crouched by myself in the middle of the yard. I have never felt so bewildered and unhappy as I did then. Because, you see, I'd seen Henry look at Farah the way he usually looks at me, and I had seen Farah look back, and her look kept saying, "Henry, you are mine," just like I do. I kept wondering if I was an awful cat, the way Farah was an awful human. After a while, something big and warm and whitish came and settled in the clump of weeds next to me. "What is so wrong, Little Dot?" Big Dot asked. "It's Henry's new human," I said. "She won't let us into Henry's room, and she smells wrong, and she doesn't even like Madame Dalrymple. I mean, most ordinary visitors who don't care for cats always admire Madame Dalrymple. The farmers say she's beautiful, but Farah called her a fluffy monstrosity." "I doubt if Madame Dalrymple understood, though," Big Dot said. "No, she tried to get on Farah's knee twice," I said. "But that's not the point, Big Dot. Henry's being so obedient to her. He didn't listen to his operas because Farah said she didn't like opera, and he turned us out. How do we make Farah go away, Big Dot?" "I'm not sure," Big Dot said, and thought about it, sitting comfortingly close. While she sat there, I noticed that Big Dot's side, where it pressed against me, was sort of squirming and jumping. "Are you all right?" I asked. "Did all of that food upset you?" "No, no," she said. "I'm going to have kittens again. Quite soon, I think. Do you know, if you can think of what to do, and if all the doors are like the door from your kitchen, I think I could show you how to open Henry's bedroom." "Oh, please do," I said. "I miss the smell of his head." As we were talking, I had been hearing a lot of noise from Great Aunt Harriet's cottage. It sounded as if Mr. Williams was singing or something. Now it suddenly rose to a climax as Great Aunt Harriet threw her door open, saying, "Oh, all right. Go out and do it then, though what's wrong with your little box? "Oh," she said, as the light fell on the six of us in our various huddles. "Did that creature throw you out, then?" "Oh, of course she did. She's that type." "It wouldn't worry her if the beast ate the lot of you. You'd better all come in here and be safe then." All of us, even Millamant, got up at once and filed politely into the cottage, where Mr. Williams was sitting on the table, looking suave and smug. We arranged ourselves courteously on the hearthrug. Said Great Aunt Harriet, and picked up her mug of cocoa. She stumped up to bed, muttering to herself, "Better bend our minds to getting rid of that young woman, or she'll be sending Henry down to the vet with all the cats in a hamper to have them put down. She'd better not touch my Mr. Williams, though." This made me think very urgently all night of ways to get rid of Farah. Of course, the first thing was to get into the house. Next morning the cat flap was locked, and all the windows were shut, though we could hear and smell that Farah and Henry were in the kitchen having breakfast. We gathered around the door and yowled. Orange and Millamant have particularly loud voices, so between us we raised a fine noise. Normally it would have brought Henry to the door like a shot, but that day he took no notice of us at all. It was as if Farah had put him under a spell. After 20 minutes of continuous din, Great Aunt Harriet stumped out of her cottage and banged the kitchen door open with her stick. We streamed in after her and stood by our empty bowls. "Aren't you going to feed your cats, Henry?" Great Aunt Harriet demanded. Farah looked up from eating toast. "Cats are little hunting machines," she said. "They can live on the mice in the barns." "With respect, Miss Spinks," Great Aunt Harriet said, "not only has Claus eaten every mouse for miles around, but I don't think Madame Dalrymple would know what to do with a mouse if it ran down her throat." She got out the food and fed us, while Henry smiled dreamily at Farah and said nothing at all. After breakfast they chased us out again and locked the house, while Henry drove Farah into town to do some shopping. It seemed that Farah had arrived without any clothes but the flimsy black dress she was wearing, which strikes me as odd, Great Aunt Harriet said, when Mr. Williams fetched her. She thought a bit. I shall borrow some lentils, she said, and let herself into the house with her key. There she went and set the living-room window very slightly ajar. There, she said, coming out with a cup of lentils. Go in and do your worst. Orange muscled the window wide open, and we all went in and took turns at peeing on the rugs. But the bedroom door was firmly shut. Not to worry, said Big Dot. She gathered us around her on the landing, and showed us how you stood on your hind legs and trod on the door handle, and your weight pushed the door open. Before long, all of us could do it, except Madame Dalrymple, although I had to jump to reach the handle. Then Claus went in and did tomcat things until the bedroom smelled really strong. Millamant went along to the toilet, where she got herself extremely wet, and then lay on all the pillows. I thought that had probably fixed the bedroom, so I took everyone else down to the kitchen, where we spilled sugar and trod in the butter and knocked down cups so they smashed on the flagstones. Then Big Dot and Orange heaved the waste bin over, while I went and walked behind all the plates on the Welsh dresser until most of them fell over and one or two broke. Madame Dalrymple had great fun rolling in the cornflakes. Then we went outside again and hid. Henry's car came back, and he and Farah went into the house with bags and bags and bags. We could hear Farah's voice in there, screaming curses, but all that happened was that Farah came grimly outside and put our bowls outside in a row, while Henry opened windows and draped carpets and pillows out of them to air. Round one is a draw, I think, Great Aunt Harriet said, when she led us into her cottage that night. They've moved into the biggest spare room, and she's hung all her new clothes there. She's bought enough stuff to last a year, and rows of shoes. I suppose Henry paid, the poor fool. What can we do with those clothes? I said. Madame Dalrymple suddenly came alert. I know all about clothes, she said. I'll show you what to do. Next day, Henry went off to work at the Science Institute. I must go there occasionally, he said, when I tried to get in the car with him, or they'll wonder what they're paying me for. Out you get, little Dot. He drove away, leaving Farah alone in the house with all the doors and windows shut. Great Aunt Harriet came and knocked at the kitchen door. When Farah didn't open it, she went and rapped on the living-room window. Oh, Miss Spinks, if you would be so good. I'm afraid I've run out of sugar. After a while, Farah came and grudgingly let her into the kitchen. I was ready. I did one of my vanishments and was past Farah and through into the kitchen before she had properly got the door open. While Great Aunt Harriet was saying, Oh, no need to get down the tin. I can hook it with my stick and reach it that way. Oh, how kind. I scudded along to the dining room and opened its door the way Big Dot had taught us. I stole past the table with the map magic, very careful not to disturb it, although from the dusty smell of it I suspected that Farah had made Henry forget all about it, and jumped to the windowsill. That window bursts open if you lean on it hard enough, so I did that. Everyone came jumping quietly inside, except for Big Dot. She was feeling poorly that day and stayed resting inside the coop. We all crept up to the spare bedroom, and there were all the clothes, hanging in rows, with lines of shoes underneath them. Mr. Williams looked at them with great interest. Do we tear them up? He asked Madame Dalrymple. I quite fancy getting my claws into some of these. She'll get much more annoyed if we spoil them so that she can almost wear them, Madame Dalrymple said. You make the fronts messy, as if food was spilled on them. Millamant said, I know a pond that's full of green slime, and hurried away. And you put hairs all over the black things, Madame Dalrymple explained, except you, Mr. Williams. You put hairs on the white things. Then the knitted things, you bite a thread and then pull to make holes. And the dresses, you bite just the thread in the hems and then pull the hems half down. You bite buttons, too, so that they half come off. She had all kinds of ideas. So many that I began to suspect that Madame Dalrymple had been dumped in that pig pen by the enraged human she once owned. And whatever she suggested, we did. Millamant came back dripping with green slime and plastered herself lovingly up the fronts of things. Mr. Williams pulled down a pile of white things and wriggled in them, and while the rest of us bit and pulled threads, Orange went along methodically, making messes in all the shoes. It was fun. When everything was thoroughly treated, we went away, although Millamant paused to roll the last of her slime off onto the pillows, and we spent the rest of the day persuading Great Aunt Harriet to give us tidbits. You should have heard Ferris shrieking when Henry came home. Perhaps that wasn't such a good idea, Great Aunt Harriet said, after she had been to borrow some tea the following morning. She's telling Henry to fetch the laundry hamper and take you all down to the vet. He hasn't quite agreed yet, but he will. Let's get on the coupe and go away, Madame Dalrymple said, shivering. I didn't know what to do. I was miserable. I crouched wretchedly beside the water butt all day, hoping and hoping that Henry would come out and comfort me, but he never did, until Mr. Williams came rushing across the yard, mewing excitedly. There never was a cat like Mr. Williams for mewing. Come and see, come and look, he mewed. Everyone come in through the dining room window and see! Mill surged out of the water, but Madame Dalrymple materialized from a hay bale. Orange and Claus shot out of the coach-house, and we all galloped after Mr. Williams, consumed with curiosity. He led us through the dining room and upstairs to the spare room. There was a strange new smell there. It was not coming from the shoes, which had been bundled into a plastic sack in the passage, nor the clothes, which had been thrown across the sack. It was coming from the bed inside the room. We stood on our hind legs to look. Big Dot was lying in the middle of the duvet there, looking tired, surrounded in rather a mess that was full of small squirming bodies. 6 of them. There were 6. Kittens? I said. Oh, Big Dot, why did you have to have them in here? I didn't mean to, Big Dot said weakly, but it was so comfortable, and I got taken rather short. We'll have to guard you, I said. If Farrah finds them, I know. I'll move them the moment I feel stronger, Big Dot said. Not just yet, please. She went to sleep. Having kittens is obviously quite tiring. The rest of us crouched where we were around the bed, waiting for what we knew was going to happen. Sure enough, just before supper time, when the kittens had begun to move about and make squeaky noises, the door opened and Farrah came in. She stopped. She stared. Then she screamed, "Oh! This is the last straw! On my bed, of all places!" "It isn't your bed, it belongs to Henry," I said. She didn't hear me. She plunged forward with both her hands out to grab. "These are going in the water butt," she said. "I'll drown them myself." We all acted at once. We poured up over the edges of the bed and stood there growling and spitting, so that the bed was full of our lashing tails, arched backs, and glaring eyes. Big Dot stood up in the center of us, twice her usual size, growling loudest of all. "Get out of my way!" Farrah screamed and grabbed for the kittens. Upon this, Mr. Williams, who was nearest, timid, nice-mannered Mr. Williams, put a pawful of claws in each of her arms and dragged. He left 2 rows of dark, oozing blood on her. She screamed even louder and hit Mr. Williams so that he flew across the room and crashed into the chest of drawers. "What on earth is going on?" Henry said from the doorway. Farrah turned to Henry and went on screaming. She was so angry that she seemed to forget how to speak. "Middle of the bed!" she howled. "Water butt! Drown them! Horrible little ratty things! Drown, drown, drown!" Henry walked around her and looked down at the bed. "Kittens," he said. "In the middle of my bed!" Farrah screamed. "There are other beds," Henry said. "Pull yourself together, Farrah." "May I?" he said to Big Dot. Big Dot, very nervously, moved aside and let him sort through her kittens. 6, Henry murmured. 1 of every color. Black, gray, white, ginger, this one's tortoiseshell, and here's a tabby. Oh, well done, Big Dot." "Henry!" Farrah said to him in a hard, yowling voice. "I'm telling you to get rid of these cats and drown those kittens, all of them, now!" "Don't talk nonsense," Henry said. He put the kittens gently back beside Big Dot. 3 boys and 3 girls, I make it. "I mean it!" Farrah shouted. "Henry, if you don't get rid of every single cat this minute, I shall leave!" We all stared intensely at Henry, except for Mr. Williams, who was washing his bruises beside the chest of drawers. Henry looked at Mr. Williams. "The black cat," he said, "belongs to Great Aunt Harriet." "But he scratched me," Farrah said. "They're all horrible creatures, so which is it to be? Do you get rid of them, or do I leave?" Henry looked from one to another of our urgently staring pairs of eyes, and then at Farrah. He seemed almost bewildered, the way he is when he wakes up in the morning. "There's no question," he said to Farrah. "If that's your attitude, you'd better leave." Farrah's chest heaved with emotion. She glared. "All right," she said. "You'll regret this." And she left. She swung round and stormed out of the room. I heard her feet galloping down the stairs. I heard the kitchen door crash shut behind her, but I didn't relax until I heard her feet distantly swishing through the farmyard and then pattering on the road. Then I was so relieved that I burst out purring. I couldn't help it. Henry sighed and said sadly, "Oh well, she did complain a lot, and she hates opera." We had a perfect, peaceful evening. Henry invited Great Aunt Harriet to supper and played her 2 operas. One was Turandot, of course, but although I sat on his knees to comfort him, I could tell he was sad. The next morning, all the farmers arrived again, looking grim and serious. During the night, the beast of Etmore had attacked the farm next to Henry's and killed 6 sheep, a sheepdog, and the farm cat. They were very worried because, according to the plans, the beast should by now have been herded down the valley inside the final ring of magic generators. Henry was equally worried. I sat on the dining room mantelpiece and watched him show the farmers the map and scratch his hair over it. "I think," he said at last, "that what may have happened is that a crucial, field static generator must have got moved slightly, just enough to let the beast slip back out of our trap. This one, I think," he pointed to the wobbly little marker that I had tried to play with. My heart banged under my fur with guilt and terror. Henry didn't even look at me. When the farmers said they were going to patrol this area with guns in the future, he said, "Yes, that seems the only thing to do, and I'll strengthen the outer ring of generators to stop it escaping back into the hills. I'm truly sorry about this. I'll go and see to it now." He drove off in his car, and he was out all that day. He came home exhausted, but instead of settling down to another opera, he went into the dining room and worked on the map all evening. I felt so guilty that I kept well out of his way. I had messed up his magics, and on top of that I had driven his lady away. I punished myself by not sleeping on Henry's head that night. I crouched by the kitchen fire instead and was miserable. "There's no need to take on," Millamant said from the coal scuttle. "It's horrible. Farah's fault just as much. She made him forget his magics." And we're all safe from the beast as long as we stay indoors," Madame Dalrymple said placidly from the footstool. "There's another point," I said. Orange and Claus sat up uneasily in the best chair. They had all chosen to keep me company in my sorrow. "Speaking of the beast," Orange said, "did you know that Big Dot has moved her kittens out into the coop? Are they safe there?" "Oh, Lord!" I said, springing up. "They are not! And Mr. Williams will stay out all night." I was on my way to the cat flap to go and reason with Big Dot when we heard Mr. Williams shriek with terror, or with pain, or both, out in the farmyard. Next second, the cat flap clapped open. Mr. Williams shot in through it, streaked across the kitchen, and went to ground under the Welsh dresser, which was almost too low even for me to get under these days. "Hide, hide, hide," he yelled. "It's coming!" I stared stupidly at the path of blood Mr. Williams had made from the door to the Welsh dresser. "What's coming?" said Claus. "The beast! The beast!" Mr. Williams gibbered. "You can't smell it till it's there!" Everyone was suddenly elsewhere. Madame Dalrymple with a most unladylike howl. I did a vanishment such as I had never managed in my life before, and found myself at the very top of the Welsh dresser, almost up by the ceiling, and only just in time. Something was coming through the cat flap. My outstretched hair caught on the ceiling. A big, dark face was forcing its way indoors, a face twice the size of Henry's, and growing bigger as it came. For a moment I thought the thing would get stuck, but that was a vain hope. I watched the wood of the cat flap, and then of the door, spread and enlarge as if the wood were so much rubber, to let the beast's shoulders follow its head, and I realized hopelessly that this beast was a magical creature. It was almost inside now. Catfight song burst from my throat as I watched it come. This was not the growling I had done at Farah, but the full-voiced, throbbing, yowling, wailing song of defiance that you make when you encounter an alien cat. Amidst my terror, I was quite surprised at the noise I could make. The others joined in, Madame Dalrymple shrilly, and Millamant with deep echoes booming from the coal scuttle. Claus and Orange screamed and throbbed from 2 sides of the room, and Mr. Williams produced unearthly yodelings from under the Welsh dresser. But the beast kept coming. It dragged its massive hindquarters through the door, and then pulled in its long tail. The room was filling with its smell, something like tomcat, and something like rotten rat, and it was beginning to rise on its hind feet, when the passage door slammed open, and Henry snapped on the lights. "What?" he began. We all blinked and stared in the dazzle for a moment. I think that was the worst moment of all. There was a human sort of face on the front of the beast's head, blinking enormous cat's eyes, and the face was surrounded in filthy, tangled hair. It had mangy little wings dangling from its huge shoulders. Its body had patches of elderly fur on it, clinging to bare, dirty, wrinkled skin. Everything about it was old and decaying. The claws on the ends of its great feet were struck with rotting meat and shreds of grass, and they were splitting with age underneath. But the worst of it all was that we recognized the face. "Farah?" Henry said. "My God! You're the Sphinx!" The beast opened its mouth full of blue, rotting fangs and chuckled. "Oh, Henry," I thought, "I'm sorry. I got it here. I'll never bully you again if you can only just get rid of it." "You're going to ask a riddle," Henry said shakily. "Don't bother. You're going to ask what goes on 4 legs at dawn, on 2 legs at midday, and 3 legs in the evening, and I know the answer. It's a man." The beast chuckled again. "Wrong," it said. It had a flat, cold voice. "I used to ask 1 riddle. Now I ask 3. And I'm not going to ask you. I'm going to ask that conniving little spotted pet of yours up there on the top of the shelves. And when she can't answer, I shall be free to tear the lot of you to pieces. I shall gut the cats in front of you, and then make you swallow those kittens before I tear your head off. Are you ready to answer, Plague Spot?" I quivered all over at this. I thought I knew now why Bastet had made me remember those 3 nonsense sayings. "Ask away," I said, and licked at my shoulders to make my nervous fur lie flatter. The beast said, "Why is a mouse when it spins?" "Oh, I know that one," Henry said, and he and I answered together. "The higher, the fewer." I couldn't think how he came to know it. It made much more sense to a cat than a human. "And?" I said. The beast grinned, filling the air with bad meat smell. "When is ceramic begonias?" it said. "That makes no sense to me," Henry said. It didn't to me either, nor did the answer. "Chocolate herrings are impure," I said, and I guessed that the riddles, and their answers, were the result of an ancient, tired, rotting brain. In the electric light, the beast looked older than any creature I had ever seen. Its fair face was all sags and wrinkles. "And your third?" I asked. This is all back to front, I thought. I am Turandot the princess, and I should be asking the riddles. Has Henry told me the opera wrong? "The third," said the beast, "is who kills as lion and as human wins." "The Beast of Etmore!" I cried out. "Now I can tear you to pieces!" And I was so exultant that I sprang straight down from my perch near the ceiling to the top of the beast's head, where I began scratching and tearing at its dirty mane with all 4 feet. Looking back, I can't think how I came to do anything so silly. I became totally entangled in a long, filthy hair. I couldn't get loose. All I could think of to do then was to sink my teeth into its nearest smelly ear. The beast screeched and swiped at me with its claws. The outside door crashed open, shoved by Great Aunt Harriet's stick. I think she had been getting into her clothes ever since she heard Mr. Williams shrieking. She stormed in now, shouting, "What have you done to my poor little Willy Diddums?" and whacked at the beast with her stick. Bang, bang, clout, feathers, dust, and hair whirled. Henry, who was in a toweling dressing gown, and his bare feet, danced about uncertainly for a moment, and then seized the nearest chair, revealing Madame Dalrymple, who ran for her life, and began bashing at the beast with it from the other side. I could feel the beast try to protect itself with magic. Henry replied with more magic, and such a furious gust of it that the chair he was wielding sizzled, and the long hair wrapped around me stood out like rods. That was too much for the beast. It turned and dived for the door. I was thrown aside as it crashed outside. I was flung across something hard. I was so winded and frightened that it took me a second to realize that I was spread-eagled across the coop, which Big Dot must have brought near the kitchen when she moved her kittens and Twit. In that second the beast ran, bounding into the darkness on 4 legs, and Claws and Orange went pelting after it as hard as they could go. Maybe they were inspired by my example. On the other hand, they never could resist chasing anything that ran. And almost in that same moment, Great Aunt Harriet galloped outside and flung herself side-saddle across the coop. "After it! After it! Make this thing move, little Dot!" she shouted, bashing the wooden side with her stick. While I was pulling myself to my feet, Mr. Williams landed on the coop too and clung to Great Aunt Harriet's lap. He explained afterward that although the magic made him feel as if his teeth were coming loose, he had to come because Great Aunt Harriet was not behaving normally. "And one has to look after one's humans," he said. I started the coop, and we trundled toward the gate. By then Henry was mincing after us, gasping when he trod on a nettle, shouting, "No! Stop! That beast is a killer!" But we were all getting up speed by then, and what with one thing and another, I was too dazed to stop. Cat Song came throbbing out of the night. When we swept out into the road, I saw Claus and Orange crouching in the way that led uphill, while the beast hovered, wondering whether to kill them and go past or turn the other way. That was clever of Claus and Orange, and brave, too. If the beast had fled up into the hills, it might have been loose forever, but it saw us coming and turned downhill. It galloped away at an astonishing speed, but as I have explained before long, the coop got up to an astonishing speed too. We fair zoomed along and began catching up steadily to the great, sharp, dark shape galloping ahead. "We're gaining!" Great Aunt Harriet shrieked, beating at the coop. "Go faster! Faster!" We were still a good 50 yards away when strong lights shone out from either side of the road, pinning the beast in their glare. It faltered. There was a boom like the end of the world, and several crack, crack, cracks, followed by echoes that bounced around the hills until I could hardly hear straight. The beast jumped up in a great arch and flopped back on the road, where I thought it came into several pieces. I was so shocked that I stopped the coop dead. We came down with a crunch. "What happened?" I said. "Oh, good," said Great Aunt Harriet. "Oh dear. I think the farmer shot it." One of the hatches in the coop slid aside, and Big Dot stepped out. "I'll go and make sure," she said, and went trotting along toward the lights and the shapes of men and guns. "Does that mean her kittens are in this coop?" Great Aunt Harriet said. "How inconsiderate of me! I hope the poor things are all right." "They will be, or she wouldn't have left them," Mr. Williams said soothingly. Here Henry came limping up, but to my huge indignation he limped straight on past us, saying, "I'd better go and make sure they think they've just shot a lion. Take the coop back to the yard, little Dot." He passed Big Dot coming back. She said, "They used such a big gun that they blew her into several bits," and climbed back in with her kittens again. I took the coop back to the kitchen door, where Great Aunt Harriet scrambled down, saying things about bottles and glasses, and seeing to Mr. Williams's wounds. "Nothing, just a scratch. I don't need seeing to," I heard him saying as she banged the kitchen door shut. It took her 3 attempts. It was half off its hinges. I waited, sitting on the coop, listening to Big Dot purring inside. I waited while Claus and Orange returned very pleased with themselves. Henry was so long coming back that I got anxious. Suppose the beast had just been faking dead and went for his throat when he got near. Then it would be all my fault. I set off out of the yard and down the road to look for him. I'd only gone 20 yards or so when there was Henry, limping along with a crowd of farmers, bringing them back to the farm for a drink. Exasperating! I sat down in the road and curled my tail primly around my legs. Henry saw me and dashed forward, quite forgetting his sore bare feet. "Little Dot!" he cried out. And I forgot to be exasperated and leapt up to his front, into his arms, and draped over his shoulder, purring. "There's my brave Dot," Henry said. "You keep getting things the wrong way around," I said. "I'm not your Dot. You're my Henry. Is that clear?" "Perfectly," he said. The end. Now that was very exciting for me to read. I hope it was as exciting for you to listen to. I tried my best. Anyway, thanks all for everybody who stayed on. Everybody who seems to have stayed on the entire time. Woo! And hey, Danielle. So, that was Little Dot. Now you see why it's one of my favorite short stories. And it's given me a lot of things to think about. Maybe some things to draw, which is good. But in the meantime, my stomach has become very hungry, and so I'm going to go make some rice, and perhaps some tuna. So, until next week, good night.